Hello, hi. I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute of Mental Health Research here at York. But in this talk, I will be presenting something that emerged from my PhD at the School of Arts and Creative Technologies. And it's basically a participatory interactive documentary about mental health. By the end of the talk, I will give you a link so that hopefully if I made you curious enough to go and have a look, you can. My research is based on my previous practice as a participatory filmmaker. This is where a filmmaker walks into a community to capture the lived experience of people from that community, but it doesn't do so as a documentarist. So we don't film people and create a story from them, but rather we pass on technical and storytelling skills to community members so that they can create their own media projects and have agency on how they want to be represented, which is particularly fruitful when we are discussing highly stigmatized issues. In my case, it was mental health. So I mostly work with communities to create personal accounts of mental health from their lived experiences. In particular, I worked at Converge, which is a provider of courses for mental health service users at York St. John University. There we produced a wealth of short films about mental health from different perspectives and using different styles. And while this practice is extremely fruitful and full of opportunities, I kept encountering a challenge which I call challenge of polyvocality, which basically means that in participatory film, every community member that takes part should have an equal authorial voice in the film, unlike traditional media where usually you have one strong authorial voice, which could be a director or a screenwriter or a studio. But it's usually quite a hierarchical form of production, while in this type of community filmmaking, it's important that every participant has an equal say, especially so that we avoid oversimplifying their lived experience and falling into some of the traps of mainstream media for this type of issues. And so in my PhD, I thought that it would be interesting to see how I could apply interactive media in this practice. And in particular, I used interactive documentary, which is a type of documentary where you don't have one main story, one main video that you watch from start to end, but you rather have multiple stories and multiple perspectives coexisting in the film, and the viewer then gets to choose what they want to watch, in which order and in which combination. These are some existing interactive documentaries that I don't have time to tell you about, but if you are curious, just go and have a look. They're really interesting. They're all based on trying to present multiple perspectives on the same issue. So in order to see how this could work in my practice, we started from an existing participatory film that I made with a group of participants in 2016, which is called Stepping Through, and it was a poetry film where 5 men were discussing the role of community in recovery from mental health problems. And through 3 studies, sorry about the numbering, I don't know what happened there. Basically, we deconstructed this film and we created a new version which is interactive and non-linear. This was completely authored and designed by the participants themselves and basically works, the viewer gets presented with some poetic content that reflects the experience of participants. They then get to choose a feeling according to how they felt watching that segment of material, and the film then changes according to the emotional response of the viewer, encouraging empathy towards the circumstances of participants, all with lived experience of mental health problems. By the end of the film, the viewer gets matched with a participant according to commonalities of feelings, and the viewer can then access more information about them, not through poetry anymore, but through a documentaristic account of their experiences. We found that by making, I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit, by making the film more complex and non-linear, also the representation of the role of isolation and community in recovery was much more nuanced, and there was much more insight into the personal experiences of each participant. And then, jumping ahead again, we tested this film with 100 audience members with different level of awareness of mental health, and we found the response were overwhelmingly positive. But what was even more interesting for us is that these are the key mental health messages that the participants wanted to convey to an audience. And from our questionnaires, it looked like the audience received these messages, even when they didn't like the poetic approach, because it's not for everyone, it's quite evocative, and of course it depends on personal taste, but also when they didn't have a high level of mental health awareness. So the fact that these messages were successfully received for us meant that this type of storytelling worked. This is the link to watch, but if you don't want to jot this down, just drop me an email and I will share it with you. Thanks.